Hi everyone, my name is Aaron and welcome back to my channel. Today's video, I want to take up a question that I got in response to the video that I uploaded just prior to the last one. And that video was, does David Miscavige actually really believe in Scientology? If you haven't seen that video yet, I'll put a link to it up above. So because in that video I discussed the fact that Miscavige knows there is no OT 9 and 10. One of the main comments I got in response to that video is, why doesn't David Miscavige just sit down and write OT 9 and 10 himself, or come up with something that he can release as OT 9 and 10? It does make sense that this is what David Miscavige will somehow, sometime attempt to do. But there are very serious barriers to being able to accomplish this successfully. One of the barriers that I can think of has to do with how these OT levels have been described in Scientology. And keep in mind, these OT levels are highly confidential, so they're not able to be described to people who haven't gotten to them yet in any words that are actually descriptive of the level itself. They're only described in very general terms, and here's an example. In Scientology, some of the rhetoric used about the OT levels is that you have OT 1 through 8. Well, Scientologists are told that OT 1 through 7 aren't actual OT levels. That OT 8 is the first real OT level according to L. Ron Hubbard. And the explanation given for this is that OT 1 through 7 are described as addressing a spiritual being in terms of negative gain, meaning you're making that being better by removing things from it. And it's said that OT 8 is the first level that delivers positive gain and finally starting to make the being itself more powerful as opposed to just taking things off of it. This is one of the ways the OT levels are described in Scientology. And you'll notice that when you're speaking in such broad general terms like this, you're not really being descriptive. You're kind of creating a mystery. And yet the fact that the OT levels have been described this way creates a problem for David Miscavige. And that problem is having to come up with something distinctive and unique from what has already been on the OT levels from 1 through 7. Now, in the video I uploaded yesterday about did L. Ron Hubbard really believe his own BS, which I will post a link to up above, I very briefly described the difference between what Scientologists believe is wrong with a spiritual being or all of us as spiritual beings on this planet. On the lower non-confidential portion of Scientology's levels, they're told one very specific story about why we are all in this degraded spiritual state, living in this physical prison of a planet. And once you get onto the confidential levels, you're told another story about why we're all in this degraded state of spiritual beings and stuck in this physical universe. And all of Scientology's OT levels from 1 through 8 relate to this exact same story. And to come up with something brand new that not only is brand new, but also lives up to the expectations and the hype that has been building in the minds of Scientologists for the last 30 plus years about what these upper OT levels could possibly be, that is a huge challenge. So just to give you an idea, let's address this statement about OT 1 through 7 being levels that address a being from the perspective of providing negative gain, bringing about gain by removing things. So that story that L. Ron Hubbard tells Scientologists on the confidential levels about what's wrong with you is that you have hundreds of thousands of sick, half-conscious, sort of dead, dying spiritual beings that Hubbard called body thetans, and they are stuck to your body. So Hubbard says that on these OT levels, what you're doing is telepathically, spiritually counseling these beings to basically wake them up, bring them into a heightened state of spiritual awareness. They sort of realize they are a being, they pop off of you, and they go pick up a baby body in the local hospital and grow up to be a good little Scientologist. This is what Scientologists are doing on the OT levels. It is really amazing that Scientologists don't have more mental breakdowns than the ones that we have heard of, some of them very publicly, like Lisa McPherson, for example. It really is remarkable that more Scientologists don't absolutely lose their minds, considering that they are told you basically are infested with spirits and you have to telepathically counsel them to get them off of you. This is what is meant by negative gain. You are improving your own health, awareness, and abilities as a spiritual being by getting these infested or sick beings off of you. And if you're a Scientologist, prior to starting OT3, actually, you have literally no idea this is what Hubbard is going to tell you is wrong with you. And then when you finish OT3, you attest to having gotten rid of your body thetans. And then you start OT4 and you find out, oh, more body thetans. Now you're supposed to find the body thetans who you couldn't find the first time because they had done a lot of drugs. And then you finish OT4 and you're like, oh boy, fingers crossed, maybe I'm done with the body thetans. And you start OT5, boom, more body thetans. You're told, you know, before you were just getting rid of individual body thetans, but you actually have thetan clusters. And these thetan clusters, they don't even know they're individual thetans. They're all balled up into, they think they're one thetan. Anyway, now on OT5, boom, you're auditing more body thetans. And then OT6 is actually just a training course. It's not really an OT level. On OT6, you learn how to audit OT7. And on OT7, you are now auditing yourself again. You're auditing even more body thetans. Except at this point, you're not auditing body thetans that are stuck to your own body. You're auditing these BTs that are stuck in the environment. I guess they're still called BTs even though they're not stuck to bodies. By the way, this is why Scientologists do believe in ghosts and poltergeists. They just believe that these are thetans who are, you know, kind of angry or don't know where they are and stuff like that. And Scientologists on OT7 will actually attempt to audit ghosts and poltergeists and demons and whatever, except to a Scientologist realize they don't actually believe there is such a thing as a demon. It's just a thetan who's sort of, you know, kind of whacked out and needs to be, well, audited with Scientology so he can go pick up a baby body and grow up as a Scientologist. So Scientologists auditing on OT7 will literally spend years and years and years doing short little auditing sessions. They're supposed to do 6 auditing sessions per day, finding and locating these body thetans in the environment and telepathically counseling them. This is what Scientologists do on the OT levels. Okay, so then you finally finish OT7. That's the biggest, longest, most expensive OT level in Scientology. And you're like, okay, I'm ready for OT8. I'm ready for the first real OT level. LRH described OT8 as being the one thing that will cure amnesia on the whole track. In Scientology, the whole track is the word that refers to your entire memory of your past lives. So anything from this lifetime is not considered whole track. Any memories from anything prior to this lifetime is considered whole track. And you're talking anything from your most previous lifetime to trillions of years ago in other galaxies. That's the whole track. Hubbard says what you address on OT8 cures amnesia on the whole track. So a Scientologist doing this level is expecting to, on this level, come away from it with full and clear total memory of their entire string of past lives going back trillions of years. And yet let's talk about what OT8 actually is. On OT8, they go through your auditing folders and you go through all of your prior auditing sessions where you had past life memories. And essentially, and I'm going to oversimplify this just for the purpose of this video, essentially you go through a process whereby you are supposed to come to the realization that all of those past life memories that you've addressed in your auditing up until the present moment, those were not in fact your memories. Those were the memories of your body thetans. And so here we are, once again, you have the next OT level that someone thinks, finally, I'm going to address something other than body thetans. And they're given sort of a little end around or a little bait and switch of like, oh, sure, you're not getting rid of body thetans on this level. But what you are doing is realizing your body thetans were the actual source of all of your past life recalls. Now, to be fair, I don't think they tell you, I don't think you're supposed to conclude that literally all of the past life recall was from your body thetans, but you're supposed to kind of like sort the wheat from the chaff and differentiate which of those memories were yours and which of those belonged to your body thetans. Now, some of the language used to describe OT8 and the end result of OT8, what you're supposed to accomplish by the end of OT8, in addition to having cured amnesia on the whole track, this is the language that's used. You now know who you are not, and now you are prepared to find out who you really are. People who finished OT8 as long ago as 1986, so we're talking, what, 36 years now? They have been waiting this long for something that they have been told L. Ron Hubbard already created, already exists, is just sitting in a vault somewhere. And that this OT level is supposed to be, well, the second real OT level, but realize they already did the first real OT level, OT8, and they know it was garbage. Then you don't get anything out of that. Having someone sit you down and get you to realize that 95% of your past life memories that, by the way, were very closely associated with who you have come to believe you are as an individual, those weren't even your memories. I'm sorry, that is not a life-changing experience. So you have these Scientologists who've already finished OT8, the first real OT level. They know it was garbage. They've been hanging around for 35 years waiting for the next OT level. This is Miscavige's barrier in sitting down and trying to create OT 9 and 10. He has nothing from Hubbard that he can emulate or package or repackage to offer to the Scientology community that could possibly live up to the expectations of fitting the bill of you're finally ready to find out who you really are. Now, I'm not saying it's totally impossible. Somebody could probably put enough thought into it and come up with something. But there's one thing it can't be. It cannot be something that has to do with body thetans, because they've already been told the whole section of the bridge where you're doing negative gain is done. So that ship has sailed, or at least you would think that it has. It's possible that the Scientology public is gullible enough, and it's possible that Miscavige could package it in a way cleverly enough that he could do something like this. He could go, okay, on OT 3 through 7, or on OT 3 through 5, you are getting rid of your own body thetans and thetan clusters. And then on OT 7, you are getting rid of the BTs and maybe clusters in the environment itself. Perhaps you could figure out how to say that OT 9 and 10 is for the first time you are now getting rid of other people's body thetans and thetan clusters that are attached to other bodies. Maybe he figures out how to negate what has been said previously about the negative gain and being like, well, yeah, you're no longer experiencing negative gain because you're rid of all your BTs, but now you're helping other people with their negative gain. It's possible Miscavige could figure out how to do that, but he would be running a huge risk. Because just imagine how many Scientologists who are ready for OT 9 and 10, if they were to start it and find out it's more BTs, would they be like, you know what, I'm out. I'm not spending tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of my life continuing to telepathically audit spirits. And I think this fear of losing a giant portion of what is already a dwindling membership in Scientology, I think this is at least a big part of what has prevented Miscavige from trying to figure out how to release something. Because at least up until now, he can keep everybody in mystery and suspense. At least for now, he can continue to tell the Scientology public that it's their fault OT 9 and 10 hasn't been released. Miscavige tells all the public that there are certain expansion benchmarks Scientology needs to meet in order for OT 9 and 10 to be released. And over the last 30 years, he keeps changing these benchmarks. He keeps moving the goalposts. You know, at first, the benchmarks had to do with a certain number of people finishing OT8. And then the benchmarks had to do with a certain number of people doing auditor training up to a particular level just above class 5. And then it had to do with all Scientology organizations in the world reaching a certain size. And then it had to do with all Scientology organizations in the world buying new massive giant buildings that they don't even remotely need. So at least for now, Miscavige is able to use this OT 9 and 10 thing as a control mechanism to get Scientologists to do what he wants. If he were to release OT 9 and 10, he would no longer have this control mechanism, and he would also most likely be hugely disappointing to a large number of Scientologists, and the membership would fall off a cliff even more than it has already been doing. And there's another really interesting point to consider, which is I mentioned in my video discussing whether Miscavige is a true believer, I mentioned this thing of him genuinely believing that L. Ron Hubbard was going to return approximately 21 years after he passed away in 1986. If we take that to be true, then it would also be true that once Miscavige found out that there were no more OT levels, which he found out, I believe, sometime around 1988, it is quite possible that he was like, okay, I'm gonna bide my time, and when LRH comes back in 20 or so years, LRH himself will have to finish the compilation of OT 9 and 10, because we have absolutely no idea what to do. If he really did expect Hubbard to come back in a couple decades, it does stand to reason that for those first 20 years, he himself maybe didn't think he was perpetuating a fraud on the Scientology public. He could have been thinking that he was covering up for LRH's mistake and that LRH himself would have to fix his mistake when he came back. Well, if Hubbard was going to come back, he should have been back sometime around 2007, and he has missed that deadline by quite a few years now. Miscavige has quite a problem on his hands, and we'll see what he does. Again, I think it does stand to reason he will eventually have to figure out something to release as OT 9 and 10. But as I've explained here, he has some massive obstacles to overcome in order to do that and successfully execute and keep Scientology going as a going concern. The biggest mistake that has occurred in relation to this OT 9 and 10 issue is the managing of expectations. Miscavige hasn't released an OT level since 1986. That's when OT 8 was released. Whatever Miscavige eventually comes up with, he has to explain why this took 35 plus years to release. Part of the rhetoric in Scientology is that these unreleased levels are so powerful that Scientology needs to be in a position of power and control in the world so that they can deal with the backlash from all the suppressive influences on Earth that will be brought to bear against Scientology once these levels are released, because these levels are such a threat to the evil influences that really control this planet. And if Miscavige releases something that is just similar to all of the levels the Scientologists have been doing for the last 40 years, you see the problem that he has on his hands. I think when the story is written on Scientology, whatever Miscavige does in relation to OT 9 and 10, I think will be a very important part of the story of how Scientology finally came to its end. I think other parts of that story will have to do with criminal prosecutions, having their tax-exempt status revoked will be a part of that story. But how Miscavige has handled or mishandled the expectations and perhaps the eventual execution of the rollout of OT 9 and 10, I think will be an important part of the story of how Scientology finally came to an end. And I think Miscavige knows that. And I think Miscavige doesn't know what to do. And I think that that is why for the last 35 plus years, he has simply done nothing. All right, so those are my thoughts on why doesn't Miscavige just sit down and write OT 9 and 10 himself, and also my thoughts on if he were to release something, what might that something look like? I hope that's been helpful, at least mildly entertaining. Before I sign off, let me remind those who may not be regular viewers of this channel, I am running for City Council in Clearwater, Florida, home to the largest Scientology organization in the world. If you want Clearwater to have a City Council member who will take action against Scientology's human trafficking, crimes against the elderly, and crimes against children. If you want Clearwater to have a council member who will not rest until Scientology's tax-exempt status is revoked, please consider supporting my campaign at aaronforclearwater.com. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks to all of you who watch until the very end. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If you have subscribed or not, subscribe